This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. Betrayal. Tom Bower returns 4 years after his sensational book, Revenge, with a forensic, deeply skeptical dissection of the Sussex's post-royal trajectory. Overall, Bower's book delivers a devastating portrait of entitlement, narrative control, cognitive dissonance, and the very real human damage Meghan Markle has inflicted, especially on Prince Harry under her influence. Drawing on pieces of available information already out in the public domain, Bower lays bare what this character called Meghan Markle has done to those around her, to the British public, and to the world's trust in the monarchy, if we are to believe it. Chapters 15, titled Jubilee, and 17, titled Funeral, are perfect examples. They show how two truly historic, once-in-a-lifetime events, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebration while she was still alive, and the national mourning after her death, were treated as nothing more than personal branding opportunities. Meghan demanded special perks, showed zero remorse when she didn't get them, and reframed every boundary as fresh proof of her victimhood. The book lays out the larger pattern exhaustively. Discarding people the moment they're no longer useful, rewriting history to suit the narrative, and monetizing every grievance. That pattern, in my view, is what the entire book is really about. And it's exactly why so many readers, including myself, finished it feeling quite angry. As I've mentioned in my previous video, a lot of what is mentioned in this book is coming from the media that has already been put out there and have been discussed before on this channel. What makes Tom Bower's writing so powerful is how he weaves all of the threads together, chapter by chapter, until the full picture is, quite frankly, unmistakable. In my opinion, he shows exactly how Meghan has become a cancer on the royal family and, by extension, on society itself. So in this video, we're going to deep dive into these two pivotal chapters covering the Jubilee and the funeral. Let's begin. So beginning into chapter 15, titled Jubilee, Tom Bower delivers a sharply critical portrait of Harry and Meghan's brief, tense return to Britain for Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee in June of 2022. Bower uses the event not just to chronicle the logistics of their visit, but to underscore what he sees as the Sussex's deeper character flaws: self-centered opportunism, lingering grudges, and a willingness to exploit royal connections for personal gain while publicly undermining the institution they once belonged to. Bower's tone is one of weary disapproval, framing the couple as outsiders who have already burned way too many bridges, with Harry in particular coming across as petulant, hypocritical, and ultimately self-sabotaging. Bower opens the chapter by noting Harry's hesitation to commit to the Jubilee at all. The author implies this reluctance itself is telling. An unforgivable insult that would damage Harry's image, yet one he seems indifferent to. This sets up Bower's central thesis in the chapter. Harry's priorities have shifted decisively away from family duty towards self-promotion and score settling. Bower then contrasts Harry's Invictus Games with his behavior during a stopover in Windsor to see the Queen en route to the Netherlands. Bower suggests the Queen herself was already deeply wounded by Harry's Megxit, his Oprah interview, and the broader anti-royal publicity blitz. Drawing on insider accounts, including the Queen's friend Lady Elizabeth Anson, Bower portrays the monarch as personally hurt by Harry's rudeness and demands, painting him as someone who has repeatedly disrespected the very person he now claims a special relationship with. Tom Bower's skepticism peaks in his recounting of Harry's NBC interview in The Hague. Bower implies this was a calculated media move timed to overshadow the Queen's birthday, laced with self-pitying comments about protecting her while simultaneously criticizing her advisors, a thinly veiled jab at Edward Young. He highlights the couple's flashy photo call, complete with Meghan wearing £300,000 worth of jewelry, including one of Diana's watches, as further evidence of the Sussexes' hypocrisy. They rail against the media intrusion, yet eagerly court it when it suits them. British press reaction, quoted via The Times, is presented as damning confirmation. Harry has descended into narcissistic self-pity, milking royal titles for profit while professing to despise the press. Bauer then turns to the Jubilee arrangements themselves, which he depicts as a series of deliberate snubs orchestrated by the palace to keep the Sussexes at arm's length. Harry is barred from uniform, balcony appearances, and close family seating. The couple is relegated to minor royal status and was advised to keep a low profile. Bauer implies these restrictions reflect justified family distress. William and Catherine are portrayed as key objectors, and Harry's awareness that he is now an outsider. Yet the Sussexes still attend, driven, in Bauer's perspective, by Harry's craving for photo opportunities with the Queen and little Betty to bolster his upcoming book and Netflix series. The visit culminates in a frosty private meeting where photography is forbidden at the Queen's request, and several family members pointedly leave the room. Reconciliation is never discussed. Instead, Bauer reports warnings that Harry's book, if published while the Queen lived, or any Netflix use of Jubilee footage would make any return no way back. Throughout, Bauer weaves in subtle but pointed implications about the Sussexes' motivations. Their contributions to Ukrainian aid are presented as competitive one-upmanship against William and Catherine. The Archbishop of Canterbury's attempted mediation is dismissed as futile. Both sides are talking past each other, with Charles unsurprised by the impasse. Harry's post-visit decision to excise some of the most poisonous passages from Spare, after realizing they might be unforgivable, is framed not as maturity but as a belated, self-serving calculation. Bauer suggests the entire Jubilee trip was performative, a chance to be seen with the Queen for credibility, even as the couple remained focused on promoting strife and preparing to sabotage William's inheritance. In essence, Bauer uses Chapter 15 to argue that the Jubilee exposed the Sussexes' irreconcilable position. Harry and Meghan are no longer part of the magic of the royal family. They are now external agents of disruption, driven by revenge, money, and a need for relevance in California. The chapter serves as a bridge in the book's narrative, showing the monarchy's resilience and continuity. The balcony scene with the Cambridges and their children against the Sussexes' isolation and self-inflicted exile. Bauer's underlying message here is quite clear, I think. Loyalty has been replaced by opportunism, and the damage Harry has done to his grandmother, his brother, and the institution may prove permanent. Reconciliation was never truly on the table. It was just another photo opportunity in a long pattern of betrayal. Now, in this chapter, Bauer portrays Meghan as a calculating, unrepentant partner in the Sussexes' ongoing campaign of self-promotion and subtle sabotage against the royal family. And while the chapter focuses more heavily on Harry's personal hesitations, Bauer consistently frames Meghan as an active and equally complicit force rather than a passive or sideline figure. In this chapter, Bauer depicts Meghan as deliberately engineering visibility during the Jubilee for personal branding purposes, tactics to overshadow the Queen's birthday, reinforcing Bauer's broader theme that the couple hypocritically courts the very same media attention they claim to despise. There's no doubt Meghan loves to provoke and antagonize as well as gaslight. But overall, by the end of this chapter, the message is firmly established. Meghan and Harry are no longer insiders struggling with a difficult, oppressive system. They are now outsiders operating with their own agenda, leveraging their royal association while simultaneously undermining it. The Jubilee becomes less a celebration and more of a symbolic confirmation that the divide has become officially permanent. And we see Bower's framing now intensify significantly in Chapter 17. So now we get into Chapter 17, which is the funeral. And Tom Bower dissects the immediate aftermath of Queen Elizabeth II's death on September 8th, 2022, and the state funeral on September 19th, framing it as a pivotal moment that exposed the Sussexes' self-absorption, disloyalty, and unyielding sense of entitlement amid national mourning. Bower's narrative implies that Harry and Meghan viewed the Queen's passing not primarily as a family tragedy or historic loss for the monarchy and nation, but as another stage for their personal narrative of victimhood, publicity, and commercial opportunism. The chapter underscores Bower's overarching thesis. The Sussexes' revolt against the institution that elevated them has left them isolated, resentful, and increasingly desperate to weaponize their royal ties while rejecting its obligations. Harry emerges in this chapter as petulant and paranoid, while Meghan's behavior is portrayed as emblematic of a profound entitlement, demanding inclusion, deference, and respect on her terms, even as she and Harry publicly undermine the very family and traditions they expected to accommodate them. So Bower opens the chapter with the chaos at Frogmore Cottage as news of the Queen's grave illness reached the couple via Charles. He implies Harry's priorities were warped by Meghan's influence. Rather than focusing solely on his grandmother's final hours, Harry became embroiled in an angry phone argument with his father over Meghan's insistence on joining the flight to Balmoral. Charles explicitly deemed her presence unacceptable, citing the Queen's own long-standing disappointment with the Sussexes' attack on the monarchy and Meghan's prior refusals of Balmoral invitations. Bower suggests this rejection was not mere exclusion but a principled stand. Charles and the late Queen could not stomach sharing intimate grief with someone who had caricatured the family as medieval and racist. Harry's explosive response? "I will not tolerate it. Don't even think of talking like that about my wife," reveals in Bower's view a man so alienated from his roots that even his father's trauma over losing his mother, echoing Diana's death, evoked no empathy. Instead, Harry fixated on perceived slights, later claiming the plane's departure without him was a deliberate snub, rather than logistical urgency. Bower implies the Sussexes' dithering and PR maneuvers, like Meghan urgently contacting her Los Angeles team for a media flash note, highlight their detachment from the gravity of the moment. Harry flew separately, arriving after the family had already gathered privately at Burke Hall, where he was pointedly not invited to dinner. Palace insiders, per Bower, deemed him untrustworthy amid ongoing leaks and attacks. The author uses this to illustrate Harry's deepening isolation and sense of entitlement to royal privileges without reciprocity. He expected seamless inclusion despite his public rampaging against the institution. During the mourning period, Bower contrasts the nation's dignified grief with the Sussexes' calculated performances. The impromptu Windsor walkabout with William and Catherine, arranged at last minute for the monarchy's sake, saw the couple split to engage crowds, where Harry and Meghan performed to perfection. Yet Bower quickly undercuts any reconciliation narrative. Back at Frogmore, the Sussexes fumed over insufficient respect and embraces, with Harry decrying really horrible treatment and Catherine reportedly calling it one of her hardest duties. Funeral logistics further expose the tensions. Bower portrays Harry as obsessed with symbols of status he had voluntarily relinquished, implying a refusal to accept the consequences of Megxit. Charles disinvited the Sussexes from a pre-funeral Buckingham Palace reception for heads of state, limiting it to working royals. Harry was also sidelined on formalizing Archie and Little Betty's HRH titles and his Counselor of State role. Bauer suggests Charles showed restraint by not stripping titles outright, out of respect for the Queen. But the Sussexes' complaints frame these as personal affronts rather than institutional necessities. Meghan's entitlement shines through in her parallel actions. While Harry fixated on uniforms and invitations, Meghan reorganized her PR team and belatedly inserted a tribute to the Queen into a delayed Variety interview, despite previously ignoring her in her 2019 Vogue guest edit. Bauer implies this was cynical image management, a lip service nod to the matriarch after years of attacks, time to soften perceptions without genuine remorse. At the Abbey, Meghan rode with Sophie, Countess of Wessex, amid silent tension, with Bauer noting Sophie's view of Meghan as someone who always drew attention to herself and refused any script but her own. Cameras obscured Meghan strategically, and Harry sat separately from William. Nothing accidental, per Bauer underscoring the family's wariness. Meghan interpreted the coolness as racism, doubling down on her victimhood as justification for the aggression. Now, closing out this chapter, post-funeral, Bauer drives home the implication that the Sussexes treated the event as content fodder. They released a rival official photo from Manchester immediately after the palace's new royal family image, eclipsing Catherine's engagement. Harry pushed ahead with Spare, planned pre-death, now potentially less explosive, and the Netflix series, both gaining authenticity from the funeral backdrop. Bauer suggests they delighted in this, prioritizing global branding over family healing. Harry's indignation at the Abbey and failure to fully sing the national anthem spoke volumes. Now, these two chapters, the Platinum Jubilee, which was a national celebration of Queen Elizabeth's life while she was still alive, and her state funeral in September 2022, which was a profound moment of national and family mourning after her death. At the core, both were deeply personal family milestones for the Windsors, moments of unity, duty, and shared history amid Britain's constitutional monarchy. Tom Bauer uses both of these chapters to illustrate how Harry and Meghan treated these historic events not as sacred family occasions, but as opportunities to advance their revolt, publicity machine, and, again, their victim narrative. And what Bauer manages to show us with these two chapters is that in the shadow of these two once-in-a-lifetime historic events, you have Harry and Meghan making it all about themselves. In both of these events, it exposed the same relentless loop, which we see a profound cognitive dissonance in which Harry and Meghan cast themselves as the victims battling oppression rather than actually being the ones responsible for a lot of the family's pain. It's a complete absence of remorse, with no reflection on the hurt they inflicted on the Queen, King Charles, Prince William, or even the public. And what we see with Harry and Meghan is this reflective selfishness that recasts every national occasion as fresh, my truth content. And through it all, Meghan's influence acted as the constant accelerator, steadily steering Harry away from duty and towards this Hollywood publicity. It's precisely this behavior played out on the stage of two sacred, once-in-a-lifetime family and national moments that ignited the public's enduring fury and hatred for them. Everyone recognized that the Queen had embodied duty, restraint, and service for more than 70 years. Against that standard, Meghan's actions read as profound disrespect. When we saw the appalling behavior, both Harry and Meghan, in both instances, but I think more so with the funeral, I've thought about this quite a bit. I will bet that many of us, when the Queen passed away, we felt a level of frustration, if not anger and rage at what we were witnessing, because it stopped being about disagreement, and it started being about what feels like a complete disregard for boundaries, for respect, and for the weight of the situation. What makes this so difficult to accept is that these were not ordinary circumstances, especially when we're talking about the Queen passing away. This wasn't a casual family gathering or a public appearance that happens frequently. The funeral, in my opinion, was one of the most significant moments in modern royal history next to the Jubilee. Here was the longest reigning monarch and the end of that 70-year reign. These were moments that, by its very nature, demanded humility, it demanded restraint, and it demanded an understanding that you step back, not forward. And yet, what makes this so infuriating is the perception that instead of stepping back and knowing your place, Meghan stepped in, inserted herself into moments that were never about her, and in doing so, disrupted something that should have remained solemn, private, and deeply personal. Yeah, I think the hatred that people have for this woman is justified, because when you look at the funeral itself, the Queen was 96 and had made it known that she wanted her final hours surrounded by her immediate family in peace. Princess Anne was already at her side, and Charles was racing from Dumfries House, and William was rushing from London. Every minute mattered. And Harry's demand turned a dying grandmother's bedside into a negotiation about his wife's inclusion. We all saw this as breathtakingly selfish. Harry prioritized Meghan's presence and his own narrative of victimhood over letting his grandmother die in dignity with the people who had been there her entire life. He wanted to drag in this trash to be a part of that. And I think what should never be forgotten is that this stupid argument over bringing this trash to the Queen's deathbed caused a delay and directly affected William and other family members from getting to say their last goodbyes. To me, I find that so unforgivable. Like, we should never forget that this woman robbed Prince William and the rest of the family of irreplaceable last moments with the Queen. And what made this so repulsive to all of us, and I think that visceral reaction of hating this woman, was that even in the Queen's final hours left on this earth, Meghan thought she deserved and had the right to witness the Queen leaving it. In Meghan's mind, she saw herself capitalizing on being one of the few who had that honor. And to think how Catherine was gracious enough to stay back because she knew Harry and Meghan would cause extra headache for the family. Now, to me, I see that act was the epitome of what it means to be selfless, something that Harry and Meghan have no comprehension of. I think when we look back and we reflect on this time in history, the anger was justified, because grief is not the place for ultimatums. It was not the place for proving a point, and it was not the place for asserting presence. It was the one moment where everything should have been put to the side, and these two just couldn't do it. And that's what lingers here, and that's why we still feel angry about it. The feeling that something so sacred was treated as negotiable, and that a moment that should have been defined by quiet respect was overshadowed by ego, by expectation, and by the need to be included rather than an understanding of why inclusion might not be appropriate in that moment. And I think, I'd like to think that if William and Catherine had the chance to do it all over again, they would not have given any consideration to these two. Catherine would have went to be with her husband and potentially would have gotten to Balmoral on time to say their last goodbyes. I do think Catherine thought that maybe if she showed this grace that they wouldn't cause any problems leading up to the funeral, but that was so wrong. Harry and Meghan continued to cause headache as the days went on. Looking back, I think the appropriate thing should have been telling Meghan that she was not welcome and sending her back to California to be with the invisible children. Of course, we know that the royals would never do that because they know Meghan would cause a firestorm in the media, and that's the last thing that they were going to need during that sensitive time. Like, Meghan didn't care. Meghan would have unleashed holy hell onto the royals had they sent her back. And as Tom Bauer talks about this in the book, about any little slight was turned into a grievance, and of course, this would be added to the list. It's really unfortunate that this woman has this kind of power. This could have all have been prevented had the Queen said no from the very beginning about letting this viper into the family. we are where we are now. And, we do have to look on the bright side that had it not been for Meghan and Harry, we wouldn't have known about all this other stuff because they pretty much have exposed how the Epstein class works. And in this case, is there any stopping this woman? Is she going to ever learn from her behavior? Most likely not. From everything in the public record, including Bauer's detailed portrait in Revenge as well as in this book, Meghan consistently frames herself as a victim of unfair systems rather than someone whose actions warrant the hate that she gets. The one thing that we see throughout this book is Bauer repeatedly showing Meghan rewriting history, controlling narratives, and viewing criticism as external attacks, using racism, jealousy, media bias, the firm suppressing her. It's never her fault. Meghan doesn't appear to misunderstand the criticism so much as she rejects the premise that her entitlement is not deserved. In understanding Meghan a little bit better, Bauer accounts that her brand is built on her truth, otherwise known to us as complete lies. Criticism is dismissed as proof of the very oppression she describes, not feedback on her choices. And Bauer implies this isn't blindness, it's strategic self-preservation. Acknowledging entitlement would collapse the victim-heroine story that fuels her global celebrity and commercial deals, or what's left of those commercial deals. Everything that Meghan has done to piss people off positions her as the empowered outsider fighting the so-called system. The public hate with the polls, social media, tabloid coverage. The whole entire world gets reframed as trolls or institutional pushback, not a consequence of ditching family, friends, public family attacks, or demands for royal perks without royal duties. And Bauer thinks that the reason she's the way that she is because she's selfish. He implies that selfishness is a core driver, not in a cartoonish way, but as a consistent prioritization of her image, her ambition, and brand over reciprocity, loyalty, and self-reflection. Now, if we are to take everything at face value in the way that Bauer puts this story together, it shows that Meghan has a complete lack of self-awareness. That's possible, or maybe she just flat out refuses to admit any kind of fault. First off, I think Meghan really struggles with her relationship with the truth. When you break it down, if Meghan admitted that her own actions and sense of entitlement and whatever involvement that she has with various individuals helped cause the mess and disruption, she'd have to tear apart the whole Meghan construct she's been building and cashing in on since 2016. Love her or hate her, Meghan is a polarizing force, intentionally. And I hate to say it, but you can't stop someone like this outright. You just can't. What the royal family is doing by gray-rocking her and ignoring her is the only way to put an end to this. Hopefully the money will run out and she will no longer have a global platform, and thus she will not be able to hurt as many people. But that doesn't look like that's going away anytime soon. In closing out this video, what I realize is that the Meghan and Harry headache persists because it's their strategy. You have public grievances, brand building, the hypocrisy, the polarization, ends up rewarding the attention that they're so craving, framing it as criticism and bias, which keeps the victim narrative going so the cycle can start all over again to help them stay relevant. All of us want to see Harry and Meghan be held accountable in some way and justice be served for the harm they have inflicted. The reality is, Meghan is never going to show us the humility that we're seeking, nor is she going to change. Even if in a court of law she is found guilty, she's going to make it about the fault of someone else, or the oppressed system, or it being political, or being a woman. It doesn't matter. We've seen it before. What Bauer does here in his writing is help us see that this is really what we're dealing with. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. What do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
Such a fraud.